Do you have an advanced degree in technology and cybersecurity? Yes or no?
No, but I have spent
like I said,
37 years
I need to get short answers,
business.
please.
Okay.
The other one is you belong to the China Strategic Risk Institute. So does this institute specifically look for risk when there isn't one? Yes or no?
No,
So why is it a risk institute?
because it analyzes risks that are obviously
Thank
there.
you. So the last question then is, you claim about forced labor in Shenzhen. Have you witnessed this yourself? Have you been there ever?
I've been to China many times.
Have you witnessed
since
forced labor in Shenzhen?
1979? No.
Have you witnessed forced, just a short answer. Have you witnessed forced labor in Shenzhen? Yes or no? So did you get that
I
from
work closely with
hearsay?
Human Rights Watch, where researchers did witness it.
So thank you.
There you have it, guys. This is how you know you have someone working on the inside for the Chinese government in Canadian Parliament. And the proof is in the pudding, because he used to be conservative, clearly thinking that Pierre Poilievre was going to win one day and to push an agenda that way. But then he crosses floors because the Liberals are in power right now. Maybe he got direction from the Chinese government themselves to be like, hey, go cross floors and influence Canadian Parliament and Canadian decision making towards China positively, because the Liberals are in power right now. And he goes and does that, and now he's trying to deny forced labor camps in China. That's basically common knowledge. That's like saying the Russians don't send criminals to Siberia to work in forced labor camps. They do. Everybody knows it. I don't even think they deny it, to be honest. What are we even doing here? Why is this even a topic, guys? Although I have to say that the clip isn't what we're going to be talking about today. But it does tie into a wider narrative of Mr. Carney's big trade agreements that he's been signing and all of that. But what I do have for us today is back into the military sphere. What's key here, guys, is that Canada hit that NATO 2% defense spending target this week, guys, for the first time in 35 years. And Carney's calling it controlling our own destiny. Before we actually accept that framing, let me show you what the numbers actually say and what Canada is actually buying with the money, and why hitting the floor of an alliance you helped found is not really sovereignty in achievement at all, as it's being sold to us to be, guys. And today is Tuesday, March 31st. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is the Canadian Sovereigntist. Let's get into the article. NATO said Thursday that Canada's military spending has finally hit the alliance's target of 2% of gross domestic product, a benchmark set by members more than a decade ago. It's an overdue accomplishment for Canada. The country has long lagged the NATO alliance spending threshold, which was conceived by members in 2006 and then confirmed in 2014. The federal government's spending for 25 to 26 fiscal year represents the first time in roughly 35 years that Canada has devoted 2% of its GDP to defense. The last time was the end of the Cold War. NATO issued a report Thursday on military spending among 32 members. It stated that Canada is spending more than $63 billion annually on defense, up more than 65% since 2014. It's a significant change from less than 2 years ago when Justin Trudeau, the prime minister at the time, disparaged the NATO target as a crass mathematical calculation and said Canada couldn't reach it until as late as 2032. Prime Minister Mark Carney's military spending push is far from over. Last June, NATO leaders pledged a new defense spending target that would require expenditures to rise further to equal 3.5% of GDP. That will require tens of billions in additional defense spending yearly, guys. And I want to stop here and really kind of unpack what we've just read, because Canada has not hit 2% of GDP, guys, on defense since the end of the Cold War. That it's been 35 years of underfunding an alliance Canada helped build. Guys, the Trudeau called the 2% target a crass mathematical calculation 2 years ago and said Canada couldn't reach it until 2032. So Carney hit that in under a year. So who's lying? What's going on here? The timeline is the argument. The money was always there. The political will just simply wasn't, because Trudeau was too busy spending money on green initiatives, increasing carbon taxes, and all this stupid stuff that just made life expensive for Canadians, which means 35 years of underfunding was not a fiscal constraint, guys. It was a choice made by successive governments without paying for it, guys. Trump changed that calculation by making the cost visible and public. You guys can say whatever you want, but Trump quite literally forced us to acting in national interest. Canada did not decide its own security mattered, guys. It was embarrassed into action by an ally threatening to withdraw protection. Guys, that isn't sovereignty. That is compliance under pressure, and the next NATO target is already 3.5%, which means Canada just hit a floor that's already being raised. Mr. Carney has said existing spending plans will cover this second commitment, which would bring the total defense-related spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. The Prime Minister said Canada's defense spending as a percentage of the country's economic output is now the highest since the fall of the Berlin Wall. He said the increased spending is part of his government's effort to control our own destiny and better defend Canadian territory, protect its borders, and boost its sovereignty. Mr. Carney also noted that applications to join the Canadian Armed Forces are up 13% over last year. Conservative defense critic James Bezan said he was skeptical of the increased defense spending, calling it creative accounting, and said he doubts it has resulted in increased capabilities for the Canadian forces. It has not actually increased our own security, made us safer at home, he told reporters. Canada remains on the lower end of the NATO alliance when it comes to spending as a percentage of GDP. Canada, Spain, Portugal, and Albania and Belgium are all registered as spending 2% in the latest NATO report, with all others spending slightly more or a lot more. Countries with the steepest spending as a share of GDP include Poland at 4.3%, Lithuania at 4%, and Latvia at 3.74%. The US spends 3.19% according to the report. And guys, I want to stop here and kind of break this down a bit as well. So guys, Canada is at the bare minimum of the alliance alongside Spain, Portugal, Albania, and Belgium. Poland is at 4.3%. Lithuania is at 4%, Latvia is at 3.74%, and the US is at 3.19%. So the countries on NATO's eastern flank that actually feel the threat are spending double what Canada just achieved. They're spending double. And mind you, Poland isn't even a small economy anymore. They broke $1 trillion. It's $1 trillion economy. So their trajectory of economic growth is massive, and they have extremely high defense spending. So it's possible. And they're still growing. They're not stagnating. They're a massively growing economy. And so hitting this floor is not a sovereignty achievement. It is the starting point. And the conservative defense critic is raising a question worth examining, really, because creative accounting means re-announced commitments, base maintenance costs, and administrative spending counted toward that 2% rather than new procurement and capability building. So the article doesn't resolve that question. It just reports the NATO figure. We've spent more, but it's all of the things we promised we were going to spend on in the first place. So what matters is not whether Canada spent 2% of its GDP. It's whether that spending produced a military that can actually defend Canadian territory independently. Those two are very different questions, and only one of them is being answered this week in this article, guys. Mr. Carney said over the next decade, cumulative annual military spending in Canada will add up to $500 billion in defense investment, from submarines and aircraft to drones and sensors and radar systems. Separately, the Prime Minister said a decision on which new submarine to buy, either from South Korea or German-Norwegian partnership, will be made by the summer or by the end of the second quarter, which means end of June. Defense Minister David McGuinty said in an interview that the NATO announcement is external confirmation that Canada has made good on its commitments to the alliance. The Carney government had promised to hit this target by the end of the fiscal year, which is March 31st. They, through their own independent third-party validated accounting, are saying to the world Canada is a paid full member. David Perry, president of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, said the rapid hike in defense spending under Mr. Carney's first year after years of lagging demonstrates the difference that political will can make. It's a huge accomplishment done in less than 10 months, and really highlights to me that what was missing was political leadership to put at the top of the government of Canada's agenda. So guys, I really want to kind of stop and break this down a little further for us. Because Carney says that this is about controlling Canada's own destiny. And Canada is buying its submarines from South Korea or from this German-Norwegian partnership. That procurement decision isn't wrong in the short term because we don't have any subs. We're completely exposed. Nobody expects Canada to build its own submarine from scratch tomorrow. That takes decades. Of course it does. But here's what should be being announced alongside this procurement decision that hasn't been announced. A domestic industrial program that uses this purchase as the foundation for something Canada owns and builds itself over the next 30 years. South Korea did not always build submarines, guys. It started by procuring German designs in the 1990s, negotiated technology transfer agreements as a condition of the deal, built a domestic shipyard capacity alongside that same procurement, and now exports its own submarines, and it used procurement as the entry point to sovereignty. Canada is making a $500 billion defense commitment with no announced technology transfer requirement and no domestic submarine industrial strategy. The capability to demand those conditions exists. Irving Shipbuilding in Halifax is already building the Canadian surface combatant. The question is whether Carney negotiates technology transfer and domestic production as a condition of the submarine contract or simply writes the check to a foreign supplier. There has been no announcement either way, and for $500 billion, that silence is really the question Canadians should be asking. And let me just add into all of this the way the Chinese really built their military, or most of their in general industry. The Chinese have really built everything by procuring things and then re-engineering them and putting a Chinese banner on them. That's really the way they've done things. And you know what? Now they're a self-sustaining military. They're a self-sustaining economy. What are you going to say bad about the Chinese? Now they're an actual threat on the global stage. The U.S. has had to re-engineer its foreign policy around China. That same China that everybody made fun of 20, 30 years ago for being, known for poor quality manufacturing and all of that. Now it's a threat. Why? Because it got so good at reverse engineering things, it actually has an advanced tech industry that is comparable to the US. And it outweighs the EU's completely. So what are we going to do? Where is Canada in all of this? Guys, and this is really why all of this matters to us Canadians. It's because every dollar Canada spends buying submarines from South Korea or Germany is a dollar that does not employ a Canadian engineer, a Canadian welder, or a Canadian shipyard worker, guys. $500 billion in defense spending over the next decade is either the largest industrial investment in Canadian history or the largest transfer of Canadian tax dollars to foreign defense contractors in Canadian history. It's one or the other. And the difference between those two outcomes is whether Ottawa announces a domestic industrial program alongside the procurement or not. As for the average Canadian, that distinction is the difference between a defense budget that actually builds Canadian wages, Canadian expertise, and Canadian industrial capacity, and a defense budget that makes Canadians safer on paper while making workers in Busan and Hamburg wealthier in practice. A lot of you think that you don't need a military. You absolutely need a military. The only reason you're safe is because of a strong military. And the only way your military can actually protect you is if your military produces its own armaments. That is really the main way your military protects you. For all of these years, we've been hiding behind the US military for protection. That is not how you build sovereignty. You need to have your own domestic military-industrial complex. Your military-industrial complex needs to supply your own military with its own weapons, weapon systems, radar systems, military technologies of all kinds. That's just the way it works. That's how you become a safe society from outside threat, guys. And Canada has the shipyards. The worst thing with all this whole thing is that Canada actually has the shipyards. We have the engineering base. We have great engineers. Irving Shipbuilding in Halifax is already building the Canadian surface combatant. The capability exists to demand technology transfer and domestic production as a condition of any submarine contract, guys. The question is whether Carney negotiates that condition or simply writes the check. So there has been no announcement either way. They haven't said anything about technology transfers. Guys, and that silence is what Canadians should be paying attention to. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys liked today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comment section below. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and